I think the one point that I would immediately make on your remarks is that we can't really talk about China says this and the US says this and the US needs this and so on, because the US is very divided itself. And my view is that Trump is the worst president in American history and the most dangerous president that we've had in American history. He certainly doesn't represent most Americans on anything. And the issue really on the tensions and the trade and so forth is that a lot of it is in the hands of very few people. Almost everything, I would say everything that Trump has done on trade or trade war with China or other actions on China have been by executive decree or emergency powers under US law, not even by legislation. So they hardly have been debated publicly, understood publicly, or do they reflect in any broad and deep way any views of United States citizens on this. There probably aren't deep views among most of the citizenry because unfortunately issues like these are complex. They require historical knowledge. They require a lot of discussion and dialogue. It helps, of course, when we have personal relations and experience. It's been my pleasure and honor and education to visit China almost every year for dozens of years. My first trip was 40 years ago, and I've been coming many times a year for most years for the last 30 years. So it makes a big difference to have these contacts. And unfortunately, even though we live in a connected age, we don't have the personal contacts as much as we need for an interconnected world to have the depth of understanding, personal relations, sense of each other's perspectives and history. And therefore, views are easily manipulated on all sides, and they're subject to crazy ideas, propaganda, cultural memes, and in the US context to a absolutely terrible president in the last 4 years who's really a xenophobic, racist, and idiot, in my view. Sorry to use the language, but he's just not knowledgeable about almost anything. And because of that, we have really a dangerous situation. I think, and I hope, but nobody can be sure, that it will be less dangerous after the election on November 3rd, if the votes are counted properly and if we don't have some disorder in the United States. I'm counting on us having a new president and a chance for a fresh start on these issues. Not that things will be entirely easy, because the anti-China sentiment runs relatively high in elite mainstream media circles right now, partly because Trump makes it that way, partly, as you say, because there is a strain of American thinking that is conducive to this kind of idea. It's got two elements, I would say, that are conjoined historically. One is and you touched on it, a longstanding Protestant evangelical vision of America by U.S. People. And I apologize, people on the chat are saying don't use American because that means all of the Americas, but I have to use shorthand just for the English language. So excuse me to all my friends in the Americas, and especially in Latin America. I'm going to say America, but I mean the United States of America, just for shorthand. But there is a Protestant evangelical strain throughout American history that says this is a God backed country, and it is the providential authority of Americans to spread out across the North American continent, and then later to have global leadership. And this is a cultural, even religious kind of view. And that has been linked to another deep idea of American foreign policy for the last 75 years, really 70 years, I would say. And that is the United States as the dominant world power, first fighting against Soviet communism in the way that it was expressed. You mentioned George Kennan and containment, and then for other purposes, but a deep American foreign policy idea that the US should be the state with the dominant military power and economic power. And of course, China's rise has called that into question. And you put these two strains of thinking together, and it's created a lot of elite anxiety in the United States that, oh my God, there's a major challenge to American primacy. And because of the cultural, religious overtones that are added to this, one adds a lot of other adjectives about China to this discourse, and it gets fairly widespread play. And the tone against China has been, therefore, increasingly more and more negative during the Trump period. Now, Trump himself represents a particular political base of the evangelical white Protestant population, and the perfect exemplar of that is Pompeo, the Secretary of State, whom I regard as the worst Secretary of State we've ever had, of the worst president we've ever had. But Pompeo himself is an evangelical Protestant who surely believes and states the God-given backing of America, and he is on a crusade, and it's a very dangerous one. And he's traveling around Asia trying to mobilize support for U.S. hegemony or leadership or primacy or whatever term one wants. So this is a very particular political constellation that is the worst that we have to offer. Now, let me move beyond that, though, and just try to put the issues into what I hope is some broader and constructive perspective. We are, in my opinion, and I've been writing about this for many, many years, at the end of the American dominant period. And that is a certain kind of also mechanical implication, if you will, of the declining share of the US in the world economy or in other dimensions of global economics, finance, geopolitics, technological leadership, and so forth. The US really was dominant in many ways, politically, militarily, technologically in 1950, in ways that it is no longer today. And China's rise over the last 40 years is, of course, the most important geopolitical event that has changed this, but not the only one, because there have been many, many countries that have advanced tremendously in technological capacity and strongly in the Asia-Pacific region, especially in East Asia. So China's not the only country, but it's by far the biggest and most consequential of this sort. So we are geopolitically in a new era. It is an era in which no country can lead and no country should lead. It's an era where we need cooperation. As you said, we need multilateralism because no single country can be a dominant leader. And the idea at this stage of having blocks of countries is only profound, mistaken simplification to the complexities that we face right now. The idea of a new Cold War that divides two blocks of nations is a kind of insanity and an invitation to mutual destruction rather than to solving the problems that we face. So what do we need to do to achieve truly a multilateral, constructive approach? That, I think, is the most important challenge that we face in true foreign policy in the future. And I would say in this regard, it is, of course, partly the United States elite understanding that the days of the 1950s arguably are over. We need a very different kind of approach. We need to understand that unlike the historical episode where, with all complexity respected, the British Empire in a way was followed by the American Empire, this is not a situation in which the US empire will be followed by a China empire or by any other hegemonic power, but by a multilateral system under rules of the game that stop us from killing each other and enable us to cooperate on crucial areas such as fighting climate change or protecting biodiversity or ending poverty, or as we face in the current moment, fighting a devastating pandemic disease. So we have to understand first, what is it that we're moving towards? It's not a China-led world. It's not an America-led world. It must not be a two-block world that's insane. It needs to be a multilateral, rule-based world where we can gain the benefits of cooperation. And there, I think there's real work to do. It's not easy to do this. And as the two leading economies and the two most powerful countries, the United States and China, are going to need extra care and extra institutionalized connections with each other and more cultural and intellectual exchanges, just exactly as the one we're having right now, in order to get this right, because these issues are not simple and they are not at the core of our daily lives. And there are hardliners on all sides, and we need to talk down the hardliners in the United States and vote them out of office. But similarly, in China and elsewhere, hardline nationalist views would be devastating in a period when we need a multilateral understanding. So what is it going to take on multilateralism? First, the world has agreed in a fragile way, but it has agreed to certain basic approaches for the future, most importantly, sustainable development. That's embodied in the Sustainable Development Goals adopted in September 2015 and in the Paris Climate Agreement adopted at the end of 2015. The most important practical step for multilateralism is that we follow through on things that we have agreed, because the world unanimously, by that I mean all 193 UN member states, agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and the Paris Climate Agreement because we need those agreements. Similarly, the world agreed to the Convention on Biological Diversity because we're destroying biodiversity. So what we need is a global politics of seriousness to address the challenges that we have realized are so significant that even all governments agreed to do something about them. But I can note that there is a lack of serious follow through in general to commitments that we've made, and all of our countries fall short on that. Now, importantly, President Xi at the UN General Assembly in September made a very, very consequential announcement when he said that China is committed to reaching net zero emissions on carbon by 2060. This is a great breakthrough. And Europe previously had made an even bolder commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. When President Biden is in office, I count on him to make a similar commitment to net zero emissions of the United States by 2050. Then I think we need a deep institutionalization of this so that China, Europe, the US, and other countries work together seriously with real professional engineering studies, real detailed plans, not just tweets. And God forbid, if we could just get presidents to stop tweeting, this would be the first advance of multilateralism and international relations. Twitter is awful in this regard. One should never do foreign policy by Twitter. It's insane to try to put complex issues into 140 characters, and it could blow up the world by misunderstandings. So we need to institutionalize the fight against climate change, human-induced climate change. Similarly, China will host COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity this coming year in Kunming. This should be a breakthrough to save biodiversity from human destruction. And China has a real opportunity to help lead the world in a deep multilateral system. And China's really good at systems, really good at bureaucracy, but in the positive, rational sense. To say we have a system to protect biodiversity, China's done some very important initiatives on geographic redlining to protect endangered regions. And this could be institutionalized globally. The third area that I would point out, and it's really the one that triggered a xenophobic reaction in the United States, is the advanced technologies around artificial intelligence and digital, for example, 5G and Huawei. And the problem here is that we're in the midst of a dramatic technological revolution that could be of wonderful benefit for humanity, but we have no rules of the game around it right now. It's a kind of lawless environment, and we don't even know what kind of surveillance is really being done. We don't know how data are really being used. I have no idea what Google, Apple, Facebook, and so on does with my personal data, but I don't like that I don't know. And I'll finish in just a moment. Okay. Yeah, sorry to run on, but just to say, this is what triggered the heated response from the US, was the sense that China had caught up and was getting ahead in a militarily highly relevant technology of machine learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, 5G, China's ahead, and so on. And that is really what triggered the, I would say, a paranoid and racist and evangelical crusader response. But it was this sense of China made in 2025. Oh my God, they're ahead of us. What are we going to do? But not on a commercial basis per se, but on a security basis. So it's a sense of vulnerability. But the truth is, we don't have rules of the game right now. And we need to put artificial intelligence and autonomous battlefields and all sorts of other horribly threatening cyber warfare technologies under diplomatic negotiating frameworks, as we did with nuclear weapons, not perfectly, but at least, for God's sake, we got them under some kind of legal regimen so that we reduce the chance of us blowing ourselves up. Well, cyber warfare and all that comes with it is incredibly dangerous, and we need rules of the game to move forward. Let me just end by saying one basic point. This session today, I very much value it. I'm sorry to have run on too long, but I'm really grateful there are 400 participants from all over the world participating. We need to figure out how to have this kind of dialogue in a rich and deep way. The biggest risk is people who know nothing having power, because when they do, they can blow us all up. And when we have the connections, the knowledge, the in-depth discussions, the institutional and cultural connections, we will not only survive, we will thrive. Thank you very much.